Hello, everyone. So today we will start from where we were the last time. And what we have seen on the last lecture are the very bases of optical remote sensing, including the question of the spectral signature, the reflectance, and also the question related to the orbits and related to the sensors that explains the differences between the different sensors. So today it will be more about how to use the data, the data from the optical remote sensing. So I will talk about different type of analyses, including classification that I think most of you may know already. Here I notice some type of analysis I will not explain in this lecture, which is spectral disaggregation. And then we will talk a lot about more detail about what is reflectance, about what is doing the sensor, about what is the spectral index, and how it brings other possibilities to study the surface, in terms of dynamics. And so in order to present that from classification to reflectance or spectral indices-based analysis, I will first introduce this as a sort of statistical method, which means that this method of which objectives are to make maps, in fact, to class the land cover, for example, we already have seen enough basis to carry out in terms of enough physical basis to do it. And then what we have to see is how to use this data, which are numbers, basically. So what I call here statistical method. And then in order to go to this part, we will see a lot more physics because more pre-processing is required. In this part, we will see also how to study the state of the surface, even in the presence of noise, which are due to atmosphere, or which are due to the topography of the landscape. So first, we will talk about classification. The objectives of classification is to produce some maps. And typically, the types of maps that are produced are land cover and land use maps. The two concepts are different. Land cover is about mapping the biophysical description or giving a biophysical description of the surface. What is in the pixel? Is it water, built up vegetation, for example? Land use is about giving a description of the usage by humans. For example, agriculture, city, or any type of such categories. Here I can give some examples, like of the possible correspondence between land cover and land use. There is no single correspondence between them. For example, what is land cover? Land cover is vegetation. Vegetation, in terms of land use, can be a natural reserve or a wood production forest. Land cover can be high built up or low built up, like building or road, for example. It can also be a vegetation, and all together here, they go, they will be mapped as a city, if we include gardens. What can we have also? In terms of land cover, we can map things like deciduous broadleaf trees and all other type of trees, like needle-leaf trees, evergreen trees, whatever. And these trees can be garden or forest. When we are doing maps from remote sensing, we are very close, or we want to be very close to this. In order to go to the land use, we need further contextual interpretation. So in this lecture, I will remain on this level here. The other objective of classification is to produce map at different times in order to study the land cover changes. Because remote sensing is a good source of data to produce such map in the present years, but also before in the past, as for example, with Landsat 4, you can have data from 1982 with approximately comparable characteristics than Landsat 8 today. So you can study the land cover change over 40 years. So basically, what we are going to do, or what is a classification, is to assess thematic classes from spectral classes. A thematic classes for us will be a land cover map. And what is a spectral class? Is a group of pixels having comparable, similar values. So the whole question that we are going to address is how to make spectral classes and how to associate them to some thematic classes. For this, there are two approaches. On the left part, we have what is called the unsupervised approach. In the unsupervised approach, we use the different spectral band of the remote sensing image. We look at the value, or we ask the computer to look at the value, and we ask the computer to decide how to group the pixel together, and which pixel must be grouped are the pixels which have approximately similar value, like these ones. They will become group C here, or this one. They will become the group B, and this one will be the group A. And then after, what we have to do as a user is to interpret this class, these spectral classes. And we can say group C is water, group B is vegetation, group C is culture. So this is for the unsupervised approach. Unsupervised does not mean that we have nothing to do. It means that our analysis comes after the computer have decided which pixel must be grouped together. There is another approach, which is a supervised approach. So from the same spectral band, the beginning of this approach is to provide some samples that we have analyzed. We know here it's culture, here is vegetation, here is water. And we give this information to the computer. The computer will look at the value of the pixel within these samples. From this, it will make some rules to classify all the pixels, even the pixels which are not located in the samples. So basically, unsupervised, we ask the computer to group the pixels that are similar, and we interpret the resulting spectral classes to get thematic classes. In the supervised approach, we select some samples representative of the thematic classes that we want to map. And we ask the computer to compare each pixel to that sample. And it will decide to which class each pixel belongs. So these are two approaches, and for each approaches, there are many computational ways to perform it, which means there are several algorithms. So first, I will talk more about this supervised approach. So I was talking about a supervised classification. So the concept is to give samples, and the computer calculates to which class each pixel belongs by comparing them to the samples. And in order to do that, there are many algorithms, from simple to elaborated. Some are based on minimizing the distance between the pixel and some radiometric signature taken as a reference, what I'm going to explain, a very classic method. Some methods are based more on trying to find a probability of that a pixel belongs to a class. I will not give details for that. And some more modern methods are based on a machine learning method. I will explain what is a random forest. So here I start by a simple minimum distance method. And for each class, we have to provide one or several samples. So here we have positioned some samples over over the image. So first, how to find these samples? What you can do is to go to the field and make some observation and find with a GPS some places that correspond to the class you want to map. What you can do also is to make a color composite using the technique I've shown last week. And you interpret small parts of the image to find, to decide where are the samples. Or you can also use some observations that are made from a database. For example, if you are interested in agriculture, you can find some declaration from the farmers, for example, over their field, which do not cover the whole territory you want to map, but a small part of it, but that can be used as a reference. So basically, I will show this simple algorithm in a very simple way, in a simple case, where I've got a remote sensing image made of only 2 spectral bands. I want 3 classes. We want 3 classes, so we make 3 samples. Normally, we should have more samples several samples for each class. So we have these 2 spectral bonds, we make 3 samples, and then the first step that we asked to the computer is to collect the values of all the pixels located in each of the samples. And then it looks like that. This graph is the reason why in this first example, I use only 2 spectral bands. It's because it's possible to represent it in a 2D graph. So here, all these pixels, all these forms here are the values of the pixel in the first spectral band, in the second spectral band of each of the pixels located in the sample for the 3 classes. And in this very classical method, which is called the minimum Euclidean distance method, each class coming from the samples will be summarized as a single barycenter, which is basically only the average of all the values of all the pixels located in each of the sample. So basically, the class is defined by a barycenter. And then, if we want to classify another pixel, for example, this one, and this step will be done for all the pixels of the image. What the computer will do in terms of calculation is to calculate the Euclidean distance between this pixel and each of the barycenter. So the Euclidean distance, I've got this formula. You can see here a square, which means, for example, for the distance between this pixel and this class, it is this difference to the square and plus this difference to the square. And we take the square root of it. So basically, this is why it is called as the Euclidean distance, because the form of the equation is the form of the formula of the Euclidean distance. It does not refer to any distance in terms of geometry in the geographical space. It's a Euclidean distance in a radiometric space or spectral space. So here, the distance between the pixel and each class is calculated, and the computer makes a decision to classify this pixel as B because this distance is smaller than this one and this one. And the same calculation is done for every pixel. So basically, if we take this example, it is in Egypt, in the Caire city. We make some samples. Here I make a very simple example with only one polygon for each class. This is done with QGIS, so a free software, and by inclusion of the semi-automatic classification module, which is a free also module that allows to make this calculation, this classification. So for each of the polygons, there is one more in the water. what will be done is to calculate the radiometric signature, which means exactly as before, but we have several spectral bonds. Here in this example, we have 5 spectral bonds. So for each of the class, we'll have a radiometric signature made of the average value of all the pixels. For example, here, all the pixels of the class 3 in the first spectral band, in the second spectral band, in the third spectral band. And we do the same for the first class and for the second class. So here is exactly what I have shown before, except that we don't have only 2 spectral bonds, but here we have 5. In QGIS, with the SCP module, the module I use, the spectral signature can be displayed like that. So for each of the sample, we have a spectral signature. And as before, each pixel will be classified as one of the class by comparing the spectral distance, the Euclidean distance between the radiometric signature of this pixel and the radiometric signature of each of the class. So basically this to the square plus this to the square plus this to the square, and the same thing for each of the class. And the pixel is attributed to the class to which it looks the more. At the end, we obtain something like that, which is a map when all the pixels in the image have been compared to each of the class. In summary, class is defined by the radiometric, in this method, class is defined by the radiometric barycenters of the samples. The classification for each pixel relies on the Euclidean distance in the spectral space, not in the geometric space. And this is by experience, I know this is something important to precise, because the term Euclidean distance bring to some errors of interpretation by which the classification of the pixel relies on where it is in the image. It's not at all the case. Only the values in the image, in the remote sensing image, is used for classifying it. So this is probably the most simple supervised classification that exists, and a lot more algorithms exist. For example, other calculation of distance are possible. It means that the classes in this case can be defined still by barycenters, but then the distance between the pixel and each barycenter is different. For example, it's possible to replace the square in the equation by absolute value. So this is other possibilities that exist that you can find in the software. Other algorithms exist relying on including further statistical indicators like standard deviation to not to take only the barycenter, but also its size within the spectral space. And we will see also other method based on all sample pixels and not only on statistical summaries as previous images. And I will detail random forest. So there are a lot of ways to make a supervised classification. There are several ways to make a supervised classification. In all of them, you need to go through what is called a validation. Because, of course, such map, we hope, is good, tells the truth for most of the pixels, but for sure, it is wrong for a certain number of them. So we want to quantify to what extent this maps is correct or incorrect. And this is the purpose of validation, and because there are uncertainties, and whatever the algorithm, there are some errors. maybe we have forgotten some classes, or some classes have a diverse radiometric behavior. There may be some clouds, there must be some shades, there must be some slopes, there must be some different phenological state for the vegetation, whatever. There are a lot of reasons why the maps are partly incorrect. So we need to evaluate that. And the principle of validation is to compare the maps that we obtain using a classification to samples that are independent, for which we know which class we have. In other words, we evaluate the map over only a restricted area. Of course, we cannot evaluate the map for all the area, because if we have produced a map, it means that we didn't have it already. So we have produced it to get it, so we don't have the full knowledge of the territory. So we have no other ways to make a validation over a restricted area. So basically, if we have this, sorry, it's not very clear. We have two classification here and here. I don't know why I've got a third one here. So we have two different validation. We want to know which we have two classification. We want to know which one is the best. So what we can do is, again, with QGIS, we can make some more samples. And when we make this sample, what we must do is to make it independently of the classification themselves. So we don't take them on the basis of watching this validation. It must be blind. So we make new samples, for example, by photo interpretation here. And then in QGIS, we can ask precision. And we will obtain something like that, which is what is called an error matrix or confusion matrix, which maybe I've got more detail here. Yes. In this matrix, what we have is we test, for example, here 40,315 pixels to know if the map is good. So in total, we have a sort of several thousand pixels, and some pixel from the sample we know belongs to the class 1. Some pixel belongs to the class 2. And we have this for each class. And we look in this matrix how they have been classified. For example, we have a certain number of pixels of class 1. Some of them are classified in our classification as 1, but some of them are classified as 2. And we do that for all classes, which means in the diagonal line of the matrix, we have the pixels that are correctly classes. Outside of the diagonal, we have the pixels that are incorrectly classified. So in the reference matrix, we have this sort of things. For example, here we know in this example, we have 23 pixels. We are testing 23 pixels of class 1. Among these 23, 12 of them have been correctly classified, but 10 of them have been wrongly classified. The same for class 2. Among the 217 pixels of class 2, 121 pixels are classified as class 2. Some of them are not classified as good. So basically, from this sort of matrix, we can have several statistical indicators of the quality of the classification. The first indicator is what is called the overall accuracy. We make the sum of all these terms, all the diagonal terms, divided by the total number of pixels. And here, what we learn is that 81% of the pixels are correctly classified. We can do also some more per class analysis to understand to understand the quality of the classification. For example, if we take class 1, we have tested 23 pixels. 12 of them are correctly classified, so we can calculate what is called the producer accuracy, which is the total number, the number of the pixel of each class correctly classified over the total number of pixel that we have tested in this class. We can also produce what is called the user accuracy. So it means here, if we are a user of the resulting map of the classification, we know that 60 pixels of class 1 of what we call class 1 have been tested. Among the 60 pixels, only 12 really belonged to the class 1. So this is what is called the user accuracy. Here, in this case, it's very bad. 20% of the pixels that are classified as 1 in our map are correct. So you can give several indicators like that of the map that we have produced in order to analyze the quality of the map. Because the number of pixels tested in each class is different, and because the total pixel of the total number of pixel of each class in our map is also different, we can use all other statistical indicators like such a kappa, which balance the size of the classes in both directions. So which means in the pixels that we are testing and in the pixels that are in the map.
So Nicolas,
yes?
So as economists, we tend to use those basically maps as input. So does it mean that you recommend that we should basically look at user accuracy?
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes,
And
you should.
Almost forget about producer accuracy then.
Yeah, I think you should. You should use user accuracy.
Okay.
Could you please re-explain what is producer accuracy versus user accuracy? Sure.
The producer accuracy is when you make a classification, you want to know if you have been if you have done correctly the job. So basically, in this case, the producer accuracy is that if here, for example, for class 1, you are testing 23 pixels for which you know it is class 1, how many of them could you map? Which percentage of them could you map? And you could map 52% of the pixels that belong to class 1. The user accuracy, if you use the map and you look at the class 1, and what you want to know is that if I'm using this class 1, how many of them really belong to class 1? And in this case, it means only 20% of the pixels that I consider class 1 because I am a user of the map that comes from remote sensing, only 20% of them really belong to what I consider, to what I want, which means class 1. Is it more clear or not?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this exercise, of course, is necessary when you make a map or if you use a map. And depending of the objective of the level of difficulty of what you want to do, of course, there is no definite answer about what is a good classification and what is a bad classification. But anyway, when you have overall accuracy above 95%, you can consider it's it's really good for remote sensing. So 95% should be a threshold over which you can be very satisfied of the classification. So there will remain always some errors, and this is why other algorithms are developed. And among these other algorithms that are developed, random forest random forest is very much used. I'm pretty sure most of you already know random forest. I will describe the basis of that. So random forest is very much used in remote sensing. It is very popular, very effective, and it has several qualities. Like, for example, first of all, it is effective, and also it can be clearly understood. What is done to the data is clearly understood compared to other methods. So yeah, it is one of the most popular algorithms in the last years. There exist other algorithms like support vector machine, which is quite a good algorithm. I don't know it in detail, so I cannot really explain that. The deep learning method based on neural network, they are very efficient also, and they are very much used. But the maybe bad point about the deep learning is that you don't really know what is done to the data, which for me is makes a problem. So I will talk about random forest, which belongs to what is called the machine learning category. It can be used for both supervised and unsupervised. I will show here how it is used for supervised classification. And random forest is based upon a decision tree algorithm. So first, I will introduce what is decision tree in order to go to random forest. So in decision tree, what we do is we make some samples like before. For example, with the QGIS, we build a decision tree and we apply it to image. We apply the rules to the image. And here, in this image, I used a Landsat image in Amazonia. You can find here some forest. You can find also some agricultural field. Some of them are bare soil here, what is blue. Some of them are covered with vegetation at the time of the image acquisition. So what is pink here? And I took 5 samples, one here in a forest, several here, and the last one here, and another one here. So I took some samples to look at the value in order to introduce why decision tree is interesting. And so in this image, as before, I first present this algorithm only in 2 spectral bands, using 2 spectral bands, in order to be able to represent it in a 2D. So here I've got the digital number values in 2 spectral bands, the blue and the green, of the different samples that I have shown in the previous slide. So here, what we see is that for one of the class, for example, the forest or the water maybe here, when we look at the shape of each cloud corresponding to each class, we have something which is elongated here. Here, 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 here. Because it is elongated, we can have problem if we use the simple minimum distance algorithm that I present previously. Why? Imagine if we take this class here. In the previous algorithm, this class will be represented only by the barycenter, which would be here. this class will be represented by its barycenter, which would be here. Which means that this pixel that we have decided to belong to the class 1, to this class represented by the small circle, would be closer to this barycenter than to this barycenter, which means this pixel will be classified with a triangle. So here we know that for this pixel, the classification would be wrong. Decision tree and further afterwards, random forest totally solved this issue. So we'll see how it works. So one solution to classify correctly all the pixels in this graph is to make what is called an empirical decision tree, which means if green is, for example, we decide some rules, like if the digital number in the green spectral band is lower than 25, thus the pixel belongs to class 1, which means we make a threshold here. Below the threshold, it belongs to class 1. For all other pixels that haven't been classified by this first rule, then we can decide that empirically that if the green value is lower than 29, then it will belong to class 2. And we can add different rules in order to correctly classify all the pixels that belong to the samples. So this empirical decision tree is very efficient. Of course, we don't really want to do this empirical decision by ourselves. So we are looking for automatic decision tree. So in which the thresholds are chosen automatically. The method relies on trying all possible thresholds, which means one threshold here, but also the threshold could be located at this value, a bit more, etc. I take only 3 examples of threshold value in this graph, but all possible thresholds will be tested by the method in spectral band 1 and spectral band 2. So all possible threshold value will be tested and compared in order to find which of these thresholds gives the most homogeneous group. So here, in this example, which threshold is better to separate the two classes? Of course, we can see it we can see it. It is a threshold 3, and the CART method will determine that threshold 3 is the best one among these 3 solutions or all other threshold value. So basically what we have to find, the CART method introduces statistical indicators that measures the homogeneity of groups. And I'm sure that I don't have to introduce what is a Gini factor to economists. So this is the mathematical criteria that is used by the CART method in order to find what is the best threshold. So basically, what is done is that for one specific threshold value here, a Gini factor is calculated on this side, a Gini factor is calculated on each side, and then this Gini factor and this one are averaged by taking a ponderation based on the number of individuals on each of the side of the threshold. So here I give the detail, but I think I don't have to develop them. So here we find a Gini factor for this threshold 1 based on what I have said and we find a value. For the threshold 2, we find another value. For the threshold 3, we find another value of the Gini factor. then the Gini factor with threshold 3 is smaller than the other two ones. So the CART algorithm keeps threshold 1 as the best among the three values. CART does something much stronger than what I've said, because it does not compare only three values, only the Gini factor for three thresholds, but for all possible thresholds in the space of the possible values in the data. So basically, if we have a 2D two variable space, it will be separated like this sort of things, or we can represent it by a tree, which is a decision tree. If some of the variable is above one threshold, then we go to another branch. If the condition is not satisfied, then we go to this to the other branch. And we have this sort of decision that is made at each node. So we have branches, we have nodes corresponding to a condition, test of condition. So here I come back to the remote sensing image as before, with which was here, based on these samples. And this is the decision tree that has been determined automatically by the CART algorithm. It uses the green channel and the blue channel to make the decision and to provide a class and to provide each of the class. Then the same process can be used to the full remote sensing image, which means including the red spectral band, the near-infrared spectral band, the shortwave 1 spectral band, the blue and the green. So this can be used to a normal remote sensing image. And when the decision tree model is applied to the whole image, we obtain something like that. In this example, and usually what I do is that I make my samples in QGIS, and I read these samples, which are in the form of a shapefile. I read this sample and the remote sensing image with R, and I build the decision tree with R, and I apply it with R. It's a very comfortable computational environment to make this work. It's quite easy, actually. So about this CART method and automated decision tree, the advantages is that it provides explicit rules. The rules are explicit because it looks like that. So the rules are very easy to look at and to visualize. It totally solves the problem that we had before with the minimum Euclidean distance, as it works perfectly for the pixels that are far from barycenter. It provides good performances compared to other methods. It makes no hypotheses about the statistical distribution of values. For example, it doesn't consider that for each class we must have a Gaussian distribution. It doesn't rely on that. It doesn't need this hypothesis like maximum likelihood method. But it depends very strongly on the sample choice. And very often the model is overfitted, which means it is overtrained. It's like a few pixels in one sample can have a very large influence. What I mean here, that I come back to my slide here, if I have in this class a small group of pixel like triangle here, a lot of rules will be added to when the tree is being built up in order to correctly classify them. And it will affect the other class, the class 1. Yeah. So this is what is called overfitted. It means it aims at considering all possible values. So basically, in order to solve this overfitting issue, the random forest was introduced, which is a sort of a generalization of the decision tree approach. The objective is to reduce this overfitting issue. And how it does that? It does that by introducing some randomity in the tree building. And so it will build some decision trees. Each of them will be a little bit different, and it will build a lot of decision trees. So let's see how it introduces this randomity. For example, in the random forest, and again, I use it in our environment. What we can ask is to build, for example, 500 decision tree. But each of them will be built over 66% of the pixels located in the samples. And these 66% pixels will be chosen randomly among them, among the possible pixels. So each tree will be different. First, for this first reason. Second introduction of randomity is that for each node of each tree, not all the spectral bands will be chosen to carry out the Gini factor calculation and comparison. So only the square root of n being the number of spectral bonds. So if we have 6 spectral bonds, it will be rounded to 2. So if we have a Landsat image, at each node of the tree, only 2 spectral bonds will be tested. And these 2 spectral bonds are chosen randomly among the 6 spectral bonds. So what we are going to have at the end is 500 decision tree. Then the 500 decision trees will be applied to the whole image using the whole set of spectral bonds. For each pixel, we will have 500 decisions. Some pixel will be classified, for example, 300 times as forest, 100 times as water, and 100 times as built up. Because it is classified as a forest 300 times, which is more than 100 and 100, it will be classified as a forest, which means that the majority wins for each of the pixels. So this is how the overfitting issue is solved. Then, because...
So Nicolas?
Yes?
So it's always solved on the same map. Huh? It's not that you can use several maps, like for instance, the same place, but with different images acquired at different points in times to reproduce the algorithm. You don't take into account like the temporal variation when you do that.
Not in this first part. And myself, I haven't done it differently. But if you pre-process the data in order to get spectral indices corrected for different effects like atmosphere, I guess you can use the random forest algorithm that you have trained to another image. But I haven't done it myself.
Okay, and it's a bit I'm going in the direction that I don't know myself, but suppose you have one image with 3 spectral bands, like red, blue, and green. You could have like the same image 1 year before or 2 months before, with again 3 spectral bands, red, blue, and green. Could you generate one image with 6 spectral bands and ask for this classification based on the 6 spectral bands, knowing that you have a different time of acquisitions?
For which purpose would you do that?
So suppose you have like some seasonal variation in in crops, or suppose you have, let's say, palm oil, and you know that in your tea, it's kind of barren soil, and in 5 years later on, then it's planted with palm trees, then basically you could have both images and know that the spectral band should give you like barren soil in a sense in your tea, and some like a complete crown cover 5 years later.
I wouldn't do that, no.
Okay.
I think I would make a map at each year and compare the map afterwards.
I see.
Because what you want to map is directly changes when you do that. If you want to compare the pixels at 2 different dates, it's better to go to more pre-processing to derive the spectral indices, I guess.
Okay, and try to have a sharp classification at each point in time and then compare across time.
Yeah. Okay. It's more classical actually to do it like that.
I see. Thanks.
But I don't want to firmly close this debate because there are some other techniques that I know less of change analysis, and probably what you suggest has been tested, but I don't know enough to really say. But definitely, I would rather go to a map on each year and compare the resulting maps for myself.
I see.
So with a random forest, only 66% of the pixels are used for the training, which means for each tree, there are 33 pixels that are not used for building the maps. So one strength of the method is to use this 33% pixels for validation, as I have described before. So each of the trees is associated with an error, which is a bit strangely called out of back error, because it is considered that this 66% pixels are put in a bag. So the 33% pixels are not in the bag, so they're out of the bag. So for each tree, we have a out of the bag error that is calculated. And then the random forest is given with an error out of bag, which is the average of the out-of-bag error of each individual 500 trees. So you can have a sort of quality validation of your resulting map directly from this. And actually, it is this out-of-bag error is calculated only on pixels that are not used for classifying, even though they are in the samples. But the pixels used are not used for the classification, for building the classification. So random forest is more complex than other methods, but the grounds of the method are clear. It's not like and I say that because I compare it to the neural network method, which I think are probably the future of remote sensing, but still have this drawback of making it very difficult to understand what is done to the data. So with random forest, the grounds of the method are clear, but of course, it is not possible to visualize the classification rules because we have, for example, 500 trees. So, but if we have time, we can have a look to the 500 trees if we want, and we understand what is done. This is a very efficient algorithm, and it solves totally the overfitting issue. And because of these qualities, it is probably one of the most used algorithms nowadays. So,
excuse me, I have a question. This overfitting issue, is it related to the number of classes? So if we have two or three classes, we will be running into this overfitting issue more often than if we have very detailed classes?
I don't know. In which case, if we have classes that No, I think it must be the opposite way. If you have 2 or 3 classes which are very different, you will not have problem with overfitting. But if you have classes which are more close to each other, you may have these problems. For example, in this image, in the red color, you have vegetation, of course, because I put the near infrared in red. I display it in red, sorry. But you can see like here it is a bright red, and here it's a dark red. So when you have classes which are close like that, not totally the same, but still close, in these cases, you can have overfitting issue more frequently that if you have if you are more different classes. But actually, maybe your question is what happens if we make only one class of vegetation, including a lot of bright red and dark red, no? Akiko? Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Actually, yeah. I'm thinking while I'm answering. In this case, maybe yes, we will have more overfitting issues, overfitting problems. Yes. Yeah.
And I have another question on the choice of sample, but maybe you will be talking about that too. But the sample must be really pure, really representative of the classes of each class we want. So
it's of course it's better, but with random forest you can include, like in this one, you can include pixels which are not so, which can be a bit different spectrally speaking, because the class can be multimodal, for example. So it doesn't have to be so pure than in the previous method, which is a minimum distance, the minimum distance method. It will, as it is built, it will solve the problem by automatically. So for these two algorithms, CART and random forest, you can do it very easily in R. So what I said before, I use QGIS to draw the samples. I read the images and I read these samples with R. I can make a decision tree and I can apply it to a map. Here it is a decision tree, and the map here has been produced in this case with a random forest. And in this particular case, clearly, this map based on random forest was better than the map based on CART. There was a less variability within the vegetation, for example. I don't know, did I answer to your question, Akiko?
Yes, thank you.
So let's go to the second approach of classification, which is unsupervised classification. So the principle is to ask the computer to group the pixels having similar values, and our role is to interpret those spectral classes as thematic classes. There are several algorithms, k-means, isodata, cluster. I will present k-means. And the one important point is that unsupervised does not mean we have nothing to do. So the way I will present how we can use the k-means applied to remote sensing images. Like for example, still in QGIS, you can use still the same module as before, SCP, the semi-automatic classification module. And you can make a map. So what we have to do I haven't given the details of k-mean. K-mean is an iterative algorithm which start by a random classification. From this random classification, barycenters of each class are calculated. Then the pixels are attributed to these classes. We obtain new classes. We calculate, or the computer calculates new barycenters, and then each pixel are associated to these new barycenters. And it can continue like that until only a small number of pixels change class. So here we have the result of one classification using k-means. I have asked 4 classes, and I obtain this map. Of course, this map is very wrong. As we can see, this is still the same image as before in the care. We have only one class for the vegetation and for the river, for the Nile River. We have 2 classes over the sand, over the desert. So this map cannot be used. It must be done. So if I start again, I make another k-mean classification over the same data set, I will have another map, which will be different. Why? Because the initial step of the k-mean algorithm is random. So a random selection of barycenter to make an initial classification. So if I make several k-mean classification, I will have different maps. So the way we can we can use correctly k-means to make a map is to, if we want 4 classes, we ask more classes. For example, we ask 8 classes. We look here with Excel. In this example, we look at the radiometric signature of each of the class, and we decide that these classes must be grouped together. This class must be independent. This class must be grouped with others. So basically, if we make this exercise of interpretation of each class, we can decide which classes must be grouped together, and we can produce this map. So this example was taken from one example I have shown to the student in a Bachelor of Geography. If I need to do it for myself, or for master degree, I will not use Excel. I will use R to make some maps. Then I can make exactly the same work. Like I want to map this area with the k-means in 3 classes: vegetation, sand, water. I ask a k-mean with more classes, like here 7 classes, and I can decide based on the spectral radiometric signature which classes must be grouped, and I obtain this map. Also, what we can do is to make some automatic reclassification based on the automatic comparison of the resulting radiometric signature. I will not show it, but it is also possible. So in conclusion, for classification, visual interpretation is very important and useful. Even not for classification, not only for classification, but even if you want to study how some land is changing, you can already do some visual interpretation of the remote sensing images. We can use this classification for mapping that all carry some uncertainties, and our input as a user is important even for the unsupervised method. Okay. So I will start the next section. If you don't have any question on what I have said until now today.
So, fine on my side.
Okay.
I already came up with my strange questions before, so.
So all these classification are based on are based on the digital number of that make the images. They are based almost on an existing statistical method. Random forest was not developed for remote sensing. It is applied to remote sensing. The k-means or the Euclidean distance classification method was not developed for remote sensing, even though it is applied. But here now I will show a more specific method for which I need to introduce more physics. So I will talk more about radiometry to introduce spectral indices and to introduce on Thursday time series analysis. So all the classification before I based, as I said, on the digital number, which is a dimensionless and unitless quantity. So it means it's not directly a physical quantity. It is directly linked to a physical quantity, but it is not a physical quantity. It does only represent it. This digital number that I've been using in all above examples until now depends on the surface we want to study through its the reflectance of the surface in each spectral band. It also depends on the sensor calibration, and this calibration can change over time. It's not only always the same. Sometimes the sensor needs to be very sensitive when there is not so much light. Sometimes the sensor needs to be not so sensitive when there is a lot of solar light irradiating the lamp. So calibration changes over time. The digital number depends also on the amount of light that irradiates the surface, which itself depends on the season, on the hour, on the latitude, on the atmosphere, on the slope. So the digital number, a direct comparison of the digital number at 2 dates is totally meaningless. You cannot interpret or compare the value of a pixel in the near-infrared band at 2 different dates because you don't know if you are interpreting the fact that the surface have changed, or if the calibration have changed, or if the amount of light the incoming light has changed because it's not the same hour. This you may know, but maybe it's because the atmosphere is not the same. So basically, it is not possible to interpret. There are many sources there are many reasons why the digital number can change over time. So in order to do that, we need to consider or to remove or to attenuate all other sources of variation, which are the ones that I said. So we will do it in several steps. Here is a color composite based on the remote sensing image expressed in digital number. This digital number I directly related to the spectral radiance. And when we want to go from here to here, we need to apply some parameters that are provided in the image. These parameters are related to the calibration of the sensor. Then it's very easy to derive the spectral radiance. I will describe what is spectral radiance more in detail. When you have obtained the spectral radiance, you can derive what is the top of atmosphere reflectance, which is the atmosphere of the object made of the surface and the atmosphere. And when you have this top of atmosphere reflectance, you can derive what is called the spectral index, which is what I recommend to use when you want to study surface dynamic. The most known spectral index is called the normalized vegetation index. So what we are going to do now is to develop this, what is measured by the sensor, why it is expressed as a digital number. we will see how we can derive the top atmosphere reflectance and introduce the spectral index. We will also see how this top of atmosphere reflectance is influenced by what is called the atmospheric effects. We can see one example here. Here you can see the Eiffel Tower. And you can see the sky is not very clean on the day of this picture. And if you are looking to remote sensing images, it is the same. What you see is disturbed by what is included in the atmosphere. So very often, what is done if we want to make an analysis based on spectral index, we will not derive it from the top of atmosphere reflectance, but we will try to correct at least partly the atmospheric effect before calculating an index like NDVI. And sometimes we will also include a correction of the topographic effect. In this image, you can see that a very large part of the spatial variation of the radiometry in the image is not due to changes in reflectance of the surface, but is totally due to the slope due to the topography. So I will introduce also some concepts to correct this topography. So it means that we can, from the digital number, derive spectral radiance, the top of atmosphere radiance, correct it from atmospheric effect, topography, and then derive spectral indices. So this is all these pre-processing that are the objectives of the next part. And then I will introduce how to use these spectral indices to study surface dynamics. So first, we will start by that. This case, and I will start by introducing what is spectral radiance. So let's go back to this that I have already shown. What is a remote sensing image? It is a table of numbers, digital numbers. It is a raster format, and this digital number represents the spectral radiance of the light measured of the pixel. So when I say the digital number represents the spectral radiance, in fact, there is one equation, very simple, that is this one. The spectral radiance, L is because in French, radiance is called luminance. It is a spectral radiance, so it is specified for one wavelength. So the spectral radiance is directly related to the digital number by multiplying by what is called the gain, represented by the letter A here, plus one offset, the letter B here. So the spectral radiance is the power that is measured for a unit surface of a territory on Earth in one direction, and is in what is called a solid angle of one steradian. For each per unit micron bandwidth. So I will develop this sentence, this description now. In order to develop this description, I talk about how the sensor is made. So the sensor is made of many things. I include here only a part which corresponds to the part that is necessary to measure, to make a radiometric measurement of what is one pixel. So here I totally forget the fact that this sensor must do another measurement for this pixel, and all other adjacent pixels. So here the sensor is described as making a measurement for only one pixel. In order to do that, the sensor is made of one optical system, which collects the light within a certain solid angle, represented by this cone here. It is also made of a spectral filter. The spectral filter, the purpose is to to let the light located of which wavelength is belongs to a certain range in order to define the size of the bandwidth of the spectral band. And it is made also of a detector that measures the power of the light. When I say measures, it means the detector receives some photons, and the detector, if it receives a lot of photons, will create a certain electrical current. And this electrical current is proportional to the number of photons that arrived over the detector. So basically, the detector measures power. And this is the power that is detected. The power is equal, the power itself is equal to the energy of all the photons that arrive on the detector divided by the time of the measurement. So power is already a physical quantity that is of the energy normalized by the time of the measurement. Radiance is another normalization. It normalizes the power that is measured by the detector by the solid angle of the optical system and by the surface of the detector. Why? Because if the detector is big, it will receive more photons, so more energy, so more power. So we are not interested in characterizing the size of the detector or the width of the solid angle. So it means this must be removed in the physical quantity that we want to interpret. And the physical quantity so far is power. So when we normalize the power by the solid angle and by the detector surface, so just for the solid, what is the definition of a solid angle? If we take the sphere here, the solid angle is defined as the surface of this red part of the sphere divided by the radius of the sphere to the square. So here is a solid angle of 2 steradian. Here, a solid angle of 1 steradian. Here, a solid angle of 0.2 steradian. So solid angle define the aperture of the optical system of the sensor. So radiance is this normalization of the power measured by the detector by the other characteristics of the instrument, solid angle and detector surface. So if we look at radiance and we consider 2 different sensors here, which have exactly the same spatial resolution. So spatial resolution of, for example, 30 meters per 30 meters. You can have, in theory, we can have a different type of instrument to make this measurement. One instrument with low orbit with a big solid angle, or another instrument with a high orbit with a smaller solid angle. In this case, this sensor will measure a bigger power than this sensor, even in the absence of change between the surface. It is the same surface. So the power is bigger in this case than in this case, but this power is divided by the solid angle, which is bigger in this case than in this case. So at the end, the measured radiance is the same, measured by the 2 sensors are exactly the same. So it means when we go to the measurement of the radiance, we have removed in the measurement the effect of the optical aperture of the instrument, or even the size of the detector. So the radiance is a measurement of the reflected energy that is easier to interpret than power because it is not related to the characteristic of the sensor. And finally, the quantity that is rarely measured by the instrument is what is called the spectral radiance. So it is the radiance, and once again, it is normalized by something, which is the width of the spectral band. Why? Because the radiance is directly proportional to the energy that is received, and this energy is bigger for a big bandwidth and smaller for a small bandwidth, which means that if we have a Landsat blue band here, and if we have another satellite with a blue band located from 460 to 500, less photons will be received because the spectral filter accepts a smaller range of wavelengths. So the total energy that is measured is smaller, so the power is smaller, so the radiance is smaller. So in order to remove this effect, it is divided by the width of the spectral band in order to provide the spectral radiance. So the quantity that is measured is the spectral radiance. This spectral radiance is not the number that is provided directly in the image. If you want to derive the spectral radiance from the image, you need to multiply the digital number by the gain and add one offset. And this information are always provided with the remote sensing images. These values are generated by the sensor and what is called the ground segment by using the calibration data of the sensor. But it is always provided, so it is always possible to derive the spectral radiance. Then, when you have the spectral radiance, you want, very often, what we want to do is to study the surface. So it means from the spectral radiance, we want to derive the reflectance for a specific wavelength. And in order to do that, the definition is here. We take the spectral radiance and we divide by what is called the irradiance, which is the quantity of light expressed as watt per square meter received per surface unit. So the light that comes from the sun.
But that's something that you don't. How do you know that? Because the sensor does not, like, it depends on the clouds, it depends on the time of the day, it depends.
It depends. On the cloud, in the next slide, we don't know. It is not considered. If there is a cloud anywhere, you cannot see the ground. But if there are some dust in the atmosphere, you need to make specific correction for that. So this will be shown in the part of correction of atmospheric effects. And what you said about the time of the day, it is totally related to the zenithal angle of the sun in the sky. So it means the irradiance in over one specific day is at the maximum at noon. Before and earlier it will be less. And why? Because the sun is higher in the sky or lower in the sky. And this is summarized by only one parameter, that is the zenithal angle of the sun, which is here. Okay. From this equation, you you include the E, can be the E will be calculated as the product of one parameter, which is the E0. E0 is the irradiance when we are facing the sun, when the sun is totally above the surface, corrected by the cosine of the zenithal angle. And this zenithal angle is provided with a remote sensing image. And it is only calculated from the latitude, from the time of the day, and from the day. So it can be modeled quite easily, but as users, we don't have to do it because it is provided with the data. So
okay.
To answer to your question, François, practically what we have to do is to use this equation. In theory, we have to do this equation, but practically we have to use this one that I copy from the Landsat user manual, which is how to calculate E0 using tabulated data. So what I mean by tabulated, so we want to derive reflectance. We have calculated the image of the spectral radiance. And what we have to do, what we have to do only is to look in the data with the metadata provided with the data of the zenithal angle of the sun, and we have to write E0 like that. And E-sun, in fact, is always the same. It is a sort of average value of how much light comes for one specific spectral band over the year. It is average over the year for one surface of 1 square meter facing the sun. So it means the night with the zenithal angle of just above the surface and outside the atmosphere. So it means that such a 1 square meter surface outside the atmosphere in the direction of the sun will receive in the blue spectral band 1969 watt per square meter. And then we have to make another correction, which is the distance between the sun and the Earth, which is changing, of course, during the year. But this can be found in this table. For example, in January, we have a certain distance between the sun and the Earth. In July, we have another distance. So we can introduce it in the equation in order to calculate this reflectance. So basically, this equation that allows to derive the reflectance for each spectral band needs some parameters that are all provided with data directly or indirectly. This table and this table are not provided with the data, but they are provided with a manual, with a handbook of the data. This is provided, or the complementary angle is provided with the data. So it means everything is provided in the data, and as a consequence, all remote sensing softwares, including QGIS with the module SCP, or ENVI, or other software, can transform the Landsat data, but also the Sentinel-2 data, to a reflectance image. And probably I will finish here because it's already time. This transformation, which is very easy to do, is in 2 steps. We have a digital number, we have to convert it to spectral radiance. It's totally direct. From the spectral radiance, we can derive what is called the top of atmosphere reflectance, which is the reflectance of this object, which is the surface, above which there is some atmosphere. And the top of atmosphere reflectance is like having the reflectance of the surface disturbed by the influence of the atmosphere. And what we will see on Thursday is how to go further from this top of atmosphere reflectance.
Okay. That sounds like a very interesting program, especially for people who are working on pollution, I guess, but not only for them.
So maybe there are some questions.
Other questions? We don't have much time for questions today because we have to leave the room in a few minutes. But maybe just one question. So when you will, if when you have the top of atmosphere reflectance, it means that if you have like sand, for instance, in the air, like typically your image is very much affected by sand in the air.
Yep.
Like if you have typically if you have a sandstorm, you may end up like misclassifying
yes.
some areas and classifying them as desert, for instance. Like exaggerated it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but yeah. This is a big topic. Yes.
Okay.
That atmospheric effect is quite annoying.
Okay, but I won't ask question further on atmospheric effect since you will discuss that in 2 days. Okay, if there are no other questions, maybe we can close the session for today and wish you all the best until Thursday. See you then.
Okay, bye-bye everyone.
Thank you, goodbye.
Thank you.